Hjertelig velkommen tilbake igjen til det andre seminaret her på Digital Veritas 2020. Mitt navn fremdeles Rune Tobiassen, og står her, sammen med dere som sitter, KL-studenter, kommunikasjon- og livssynsstudenter på NLA Gimlekollen. Og det utrolig spennende å ha dette som en del av det obligatoriske opplegget og være på Veritas-konferansen. Og så det da Gimlekollen, eller NLA Gimlekollen her sammen med Bibelskolen i Grimstad og laget som arrangerer dette, og det utrolig spennende. Nå det altså Andy Bannister som skal tale til oss, eller undervise oss. Han begynte faktisk som stand-up-komiker, og ble etter hvert både islamkjenner og en kristen apologet. Han kjent og etterspurt taler i RCIM, eller i Veritas International Ministry, og så har han også en utrolig god humor som han sper på med, spesielt denne boka her. Ateisten som ikke fantes, som spekket med humor. For han opplevde det at når han så disse motsvarende til bøker som Outgrowing God eller God Illusion og så videre, så var det veldig mange gode bøker som motsvarte disse, men de var litt kjedelige. Og mange av disse bøkene som er beskrevet har vært fulle av humor, og så kommer litt sånn kjedelige bøker tilbake igjen. Og så oppleves av og til kanskje kristen tro litt som litt kjedelig. Og derfor det veldig gøy å kunne introdusere en taler som har humor. Så kan vi spørre om han god eller dårlig, men han har i hvert fall humor. Og så får vi lov til å høre han på temaet for denne boka her. Ateisten som ikke fantes, oversatt til norsk nå nylig, og som også tema for hans tale. Den andre boka jeg har lyst til å dele med dere før vi slipper henne til, det Lurt av læreboken. Bjørn Are Davidsen, en av de mest kjente apologetene i Norges land, som da har skrevet Lurt av læreboken. Den avdekker sekulære myter og fordommer i ulike lærebøker. Og det var en av bøkene som Bjørn Are Davidsen har vært med å skrive, og anbefaler det på det varmeste. Så undersøk disse bøkene her og flere på Veritas-konferansens side. Der vil du få sett bokbord, et digitalt bokbord som du kan bare fråtse i og kose deg. Så det veldig fint. Men nå gir vi ordet til Andy Bannister. Han har fått tema som boka The Atheist Who Didn't Exist. The Terrible Consequences of Bad Arguments. Vær så god.
Well, hello. It's really good to be with you today at the conference, albeit sadly remotely and in virtual form due to the coronavirus situation. My name is Andy Bannister. I am the director of the SOLAS Centre for Public Christianity, based over in Scotland, and you can find out all about us, as well as get your hands on hundreds of free resources, from videos to articles and more, if you visit our website at solas-cpc.org. Well, a few years ago, I was woken from sleep just before midnight by a phone call. Bleary-eyed, I answered the phone to hear an old friend announce down the phone line to me. He said, "Andy, you've got to get down to London. Got to get to London because there are atheist buses here." Now, my sleep-addled brain, I think, was a bit confused because I recall asking my friend how he knew whether or not a bus believed in God. In fact, I said my memory of travelling on buses in London was the slightly sort of gung-ho approach to road safety taken by many London bus drivers, in my experience, tended to make people believe more in God than less. However, once we'd cleared up that minor confusion, my friend went on to explain to me that Richard Dawkins and a number of other celebrity atheists had taken out adverts on the side of buses in London, and they've now spread to other cities actually, and these adverts on the side of these buses read like this: "There's probably no God, so stop worrying and enjoy your life." Well, the atheist bus ad, as it came to be known, in some ways typifies, beautifully sums up what has now come to be called the New Atheist movement. New atheism was a term coined back in 2006 by a journalist from Wired magazine to describe the kind of media-savvy, meme-heavy, soundbite-heavy, culturally engaged, wildly popular form of atheism that came to be identified with atheists like Richard Dawkins from Oxford University, Christopher Hitchens, Daniel Dennett, and many others likewise. And since the new atheism began, back in 2006, it's certainly had a big impact, right? Its proponents have sold millions and millions of books. There have been millions and millions of YouTube videos watched, and so on and so forth. Well, here we are, 13, 14 years on from the launch of the new atheism. And although many of its leading figures have now somewhat fallen from glory, so for example, Richard Dawkins is probably now more, certainly here in the UK, more a figure of fun than anything else. His tweets, that he has a tendency to say what he thinks on Twitter, many people consider them to be almost as bad as the kind of stuff that Donald Trump puts out. But the arguments of the new atheism, the arguments they popularised, have gone mainstream. And you can find them all over the internet and repeated in numerous books and articles and videos and media. And what I began to notice early on was that, of course, many of those arguments are really bad arguments. Now, don't get me wrong here, it is perfectly possible to be a thoughtful, intellectually rigorous atheist. I have many atheist friends who I would consider to be thoughtful and thought through, who've done their very best to think about the big questions of life and do so in a way that's rigorous. But the new atheist arguments, on the other hand, they tend to be embarrassingly bad, cringe-worthily poor, and fall apart when you examine them. What do I mean? Well, take the atheist bus ad. Take that statement on the side of the bus. There is probably no God. Now stop worrying and enjoy your life. Take that as an example. In particular, look at the second half of that bus advertisement. Enjoy your life. You know, immediately we can ask some questions, right? Is that really the whole point of life? Is the whole purpose of your life simply enjoyment? I mean, some would say, isn't there much more to life than just enjoyment? I mean, what about the other range of human emotions that are out there? What about compassion, or delight, or hope, or kindness, or joy, or love, quite frankly? Why is it the atheist bus ad zooms in on just enjoyment? Well, as the best-selling British writer Francis Spufford put it in his book, Defending the Christian Faith, Unapologetic, this is what he wrote. Enjoyment is one emotion. The only things in the world that are designed to elicit enjoyment, and only enjoyment, are products. And your life is not a product. To say that life should be enjoyed, and just enjoyed, is like saying that mountains should have only summits, or that all colours should be purple, or that all plays should be by Shakespeare. This really is a bizarre category error. Well, the atheist bus ad also raises the question, what if you're not enjoying your life? What if you're jobless or friendless? What if you're living in fear or poor health or abject poverty? Of course, if you are struggling in life, and if atheism is right that there is no God, then you're alone. You are utterly alone in a universe that cares as little about you and your enjoyment as it does about the fate of the amoeba, the ant, or the aardvark. There is no hope, there is no justice, and there's certainly nothing inherently wrong with poverty, incidentally, so hey, just quit protesting. On atheism, life favours the winners, some get the breaks, and others get the sticky end of the stick. Yet others get to make millions of dollars selling books on atheism. Enjoy your life? Well, nice work, if you can get it. Well, the problems that I've just unpacked and picked in the atheist bus advertisement illustrate why I wrote my book, why I wrote the book, The Atheist Who Didn't Exist. And it's just been translated into Norwegian, which is a cause for great celebration, especially actually in my household, because my wife Astrid is 50% English, 25% Swedish, and 25% Norwegian. So about time, she said, that it's made it into the Scandinavian countries. Well, I wrote that book because I felt there was a need to respond to some of the common atheist bad arguments out there, but to do so in a way that was funny, that was readable, accessible, as well as serious and deep. And it was designed to be a book that you can actually give to an atheist friend and promise them they will actually enjoy it. Well, over the next 30 minutes or so, what I'd like to do for you is tackle 3 anti-God arguments that the new atheism has popularised. Arguments that you still hear all over the place, even 14 years on from when books like Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion popularised them. So, let's dive in. The first bad argument I want to explore is the common claim made by many atheists, that atheism is not actually a belief system. It's an absence, purely the absence of belief, and therefore they don't need to defend it. Let me give you a flavour of what some of them are saying. Listen to the words of the late Christopher Hitchens, another early new atheist author, and author of the best-selling atheist book, God is Not Great. Listen to what Hitchens wrote. He said, "Our belief is not a belief." Interesting, eh? Or an atheist friend of mine on Twitter, when we were discussing this, he wrote these words a few years ago. I think actually he summed up this argument beautifully. He wrote to me, he said, it's easy. He said, atheism isn't a claim. It's just non-belief. Non-belief in the claim there is a God. Well, I've lost count of how many times I've heard versions of that, and rhetorically, it's not a bad move. If atheism is simply an absence, a negative, if it's just the mere absence of belief in God, then presumably atheists can sit there throwing stones at everybody else while never having to justify their own beliefs. But does this idea actually work? Well, not really. And let me illustrate why it doesn't by way of a, hopefully, slightly comedic illustration for you today. Imagine I'm sitting having coffee with an old friend who's in town, haven't seen them for some years, and suddenly across the cappuccinos, my friend looks at me and announces, I don't believe that Sweden exists. What on earth do you mean? I reply, shocked by what I've just heard. Well, it's simple, they respond. I'm a Scandinavian skeptic. I don't think Sweden exists. Sweden is just a political conspiracy invented to motivate other European citizens to work harder. You know, all that talk of the best healthcare system, the highest standard of living, of tall, svelte and beautiful people. Come on, it sounds more and more like a myth. The more you hear it, I am not fooled. I do not believe that Sweden exists. I look at him and puzzled and say, look, you know, you're insane. I mean, what do you mean you don't believe in Sweden? I mean, that's ridiculous. If Sweden doesn't exist, how do you explain IKEA furniture? Or how do you explain ABBA music? Or how do you explain what glues Norway to Finland? There's a staggering claim. Where is your evidence? Evidence, my friend says, looking puzzled. Oh, I see your problem. You think my denial of Sweden is a belief, but it isn't. It's just a non-belief, the absence of belief in a country. There's nothing I need to explain. I'm talking about something I just lack. I just lack a belief in Sweden, and therefore I don't have to give any evidence for it at all. Do you know, it's interesting, isn't it, that we all see instantly that something is wildly wrong when it comes to the claim, I don't believe that Sweden exists and I don't need to give evidence for that. Yet many atheists are saying exactly the same thing when they tell us they can deny that God exists, they don't believe in God, but they don't need to give any evidence for that claim. So let's unpack this a bit. What is actually wrong with suggesting that atheism is a non-belief and nothing more needs to be said? Well, I can think of several things, and I cover a few more in the book. So firstly, if atheism is merely the lack of belief in God, then presumably that means my cat is an atheist, as she lacks a belief in God. Although, of course, some people would argue that cats think they are God, but that's another debate for another time. Other things that presumably are atheists because they lack a belief in God, potatoes, the colour green, small rocks, rubber chickens. Those are all atheists, presumably, because they don't have a belief in God either. So clearly more is going on. We obviously desperately need a better definition of atheism, otherwise this gets ridiculous. Well, the next problem, of course, is that beliefs, real, actual beliefs, often function as identity markers. That's a clue that we're dealing with a real belief. For example, Christians, we gain our identity from our belief that God has revealed himself uniquely and supremely in and through Jesus Christ. Or we might consider sports fans. If you're a soccer fan, if you're perhaps a Manchester United or Liverpool fan or one of those other kind of international teams, you're united in the belief in your team's, well, usual prowess on the soccer field. and it glues you together with other fans. But of course, non-beliefs don't have this identity-forming capacity. For example, I don't believe in Santa Claus. Sorry to let down any of you today for whom that's a big disappointment. I don't believe in Santa Claus, but I don't introduce myself at parties by saying, hello, I'm an Santa Clausarian. Nor do I attend annual meetings for people who don't believe in the lost continent of Atlantis. Non-beliefs don't have this identity-forming function. But many atheists do use their belief precisely as an identity marker. They introduce themselves as atheists. They proudly write free thinker or skeptic in their social media profiles, with a more zealously enthusiastic, changing their profile pictures on social media to little pictures of the flying spaghetti monster. And furthermore, many atheists show tendencies to gather in communities centered around their atheism. Some are even starting churches. I kid you not. There are atheist churches here in London and other parts of the world. A few years ago, an atheist church here called the Sunday Assembly started in London, where every Sunday atheists gather to hear talks on everything from volunteering to climate change. Then they listen to secular songs and they sit around and have a cup of tea afterwards. So, it does rather look as if atheism is actually a belief system. It functions like one, particularly in that identity-forming capacity that it has. Atheism is a worldview. It attempts to provide answers to ultimate questions. One definition of a worldview is it tries to answer questions like, is there a God? And if so, what is he like? What does it mean to be human? What's gone wrong with the world and what's the solution? And atheism certainly thinks it has an answer to all of those questions. So to my atheist friends, I would simply say, you know what? All of us, every human being, we have beliefs that are central for us, beliefs that we like to shape our lives around, and all of us, Christians and atheists, we need to be willing to give reasons for those beliefs. And if atheists are not willing to give reasons for their belief, if they want to duck that responsibility, then I can do no better than commend them to one of their own, Christopher Hitchens, who said, that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. And in the case of the new atheism, that goes for atheism too. Well, our second bad atheist argument is also pretty widespread. And it's the belief, it's the claim that we don't need God because science can explain everything. For example, listen to these words from the world-famous physicist, the late Stephen Hawking. He wrote, philosophy is dead. Philosophy is dead. Philosophy has not kept up with developments in science, particularly in physics. Scientists have become the bearers of the torch of discovery in our quest for knowledge. Taking things even slightly further, we have the Nobel Prize-winning chemist, Harry Kroto, who said science is the only philosophical construct we have to determine truth with any degree of reliability. You get the idea. There is simply no room for God anymore. We don't need anything, actually, other than science, because science can answer any and all questions. So, does this work? Well, not really. And again, let me illustrate for you with an illustration. Picture, if you will, one of the most famous paintings in the world, Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. Now, suppose we want to know why Leonardo da Vinci painted that portrait of Lisa del Giocondo with that enigmatic smile. It's a very strange facial expression she's wearing, right? Is she bored? Is she puzzled? Is she constipated? Well, let's follow Stephen Hawking's advice and try to answer that question using science. So one night, we take ourselves off to Paris and we wait until the Louvre, the museum where the Mona Lisa hangs. We wait till the museum is closed and all the gendarmes have gone to sleep, and we sneak carefully to the gallery where the Mona Lisa is hanging. Very carefully, we use a diamond-tipped drill to cut a hole in the bulletproof glass protecting the picture, and we scrape a sample of the paint that Leonardo da Vinci used to paint the Mona Lisa. And we also cut off, using a hacksaw, a portion of the wood frame on which he's painted. We then take the paint and we take the piece of wood and we run to the roof of the Louvre and we escape in our evil genius helicopter, because every criminal mastermind needs one of those. And we take the paint and we take the wood back to our evil lair. And there in our secret laboratory, we use a spectrographic analysis to analyse the paint from the picture and determine the chemicals that it's made from. And we also use another scientific tool called dendrochronology to ascertain when the tree was cut down, from which the panels were cut, from which the frame for the Mona Lisa was made. Now, would either experiment, with spectrographic analysis or dendrochronology or any other experiment, would they actually tell us why Leonardo da Vinci painted the Mona Lisa with that expression? Would any experiment lead us to the truth rather than 20 years in a French prison eating cheese? Well, no. Science can't help us here because science cannot answer the question we were asking. Why did Leonardo da Vinci paint the Mona Lisa with that facial expression? To answer that question, we don't want science, we need art history. Art history is the discipline you need, not physics or chemistry or biology or anything else. You see, science can't explain everything, and there are lots of problems for our atheist friends, particularly if they claim it does. You see, the problem we're getting at here, and the first big problem with claiming science can do anything, is that science is a tool. And like all tools, science does some things well, and it does some things badly. For example, a hammer is a magnificent thing to have in your toolbox. If you plan to put some bookshelves up, a hammer is your friend. It is wonderful. But if you try and use your hammer for brain surgery, unless you're operating perhaps on certain politicians, you are going to go badly wrong. As the Nobel Prize winning scientist Peter Medawar wrote in his famous book, The Limits of Science, Peter wrote that there is indeed a limit to science is made very likely by the existence of questions that science cannot answer, and that no conceivable answer of science would empower it to answer. I have in mind questions like, how did everything begin? What are we all here for? And what is the point of living? Those are pretty foundational questions, and science can't help us with them. Well, another thing that science can't explain is its own foundations. You see, science actually stands on at least two pillars, two foundations. The idea, firstly, that pursuing truth is a good thing. And secondly, the belief that you should report your results in your scientific experiments honestly and not mislead people. But to both those pillars, we can ask why. Why is it a good idea to pursue truth? I had a friend some years ago who was doing a PhD looking at the mating habits of a particular type of frog in the Amazonian rainforests. And if you asked her why she was doing that, her answer was, because I find it interesting. I actually think that's a perfectly noble answer. But it's a very Christian one, actually, that it's a good thing to pursue truth just for the sake of truth. And furthermore, why is it wrong to lie about your experiments? Why not make up the results if that gets you the grant application or the Nobel Prize or whatever? But of course, both those questions, why we pursue truth and why we tell the truth about our experiments, are fundamental to science. But science can't tell you either of those things. It can't tell you why you should pursue truth, and it can't tell you why it is a good thing not to lie. Both are actually ethical questions, connected far more with issues around what the good life and morality looks like. Well, next up, science also fails to explain mind and consciousness. And without our mind, without our consciousness, without our reason, we can't do science in the first place. You know, many new atheist thinkers have attempted to literally explain our thinking away. For example, here's Daniel Dennett, commonly mistaken for Santa Claus, in full flow. Listen to his words as he tries to explain the mind and the brain away in purely physical, atheistic terms. He says there is only one sort of stuff, namely matter, the physical stuff of physics, chemistry, and physiology, and the mind is somehow nothing more but than a physical phenomenon. In short, the mind is the brain, and we can, in principle, account for every mental phenomenon using the same basic principles, laws, and raw materials that suffice to explain radioactivity, continental drift, photosynthesis, reproduction, nutrition, and growth. Oh, my word, did you truly grasp what Dennett just said there? He's saying that all that you are, your hopes, your dreams, your beliefs, your values, and above all, your thinking and your reasoning, they are nothing more than the movements of atoms jostling together, chemicals fizzing, and neurons buzzing. Physics, he says, can explain your beliefs with the same ease that it can explain earthquakes or plant growth. He used the example of continental drift and photosynthesis. But a moment's thought should have told Dennett there's a problem here. Well, several problems, but one of the biggest is that continental drift and photosynthesis are not rational. You know, I have occasionally been known to indulge in the occasional glass of wine on a summer's evening, but not even in my most kind of relaxed moments have I ever thought to inquire of a newly grown leaf's view of politics, nor have I sought the advice of the Eurasian plate on the finer points of Shakespearean sonnets. So, I mean, the thing that Dennett fails to grasp here is if he's right, something follows. Earthquakes and photosynthesis and those things, they're not rational. They're totally irrational. And if we are the same as they are, then we aren't rational either. See, once you've explained away the mind as a chemical reaction, once you've explained away thinking as a reflex, once you've explained selfhood as an illusion, a trick played on us by our genes, as one atheist put it to me, what are you actually left with when you have chopped, sliced, diced, and reduced the human mind? You are left with nothing. You are left with nothing. And I emphasize that you are left with nothing because on this description of reality, you don't actually exist either. You're just this collection of bits. And thus, as the philosopher Mary Midgley put it much more eloquently than I can do, she wrote, "It is all very well to eliminate God from the intelligible universe, but eliminating ourselves from it blocks all sorts of inquiries." Well, the final bad argument I want to look at in this talk is another new atheist claim that was popularised by the new atheist movement, but now you hear it all over the place, and it's the claim that you don't need God to be good. Listen to how the author of the Young Atheist's Handbook, Alam Shahar, a former Muslim, but now an atheist, how he puts it. He writes, "Despite not believing in God, and not believing in any afterlife where I might be rewarded or punished for my behaviour, I try to be a good person. That's the most that any of us can do." In other words, Alam is saying he doesn't need God to be good. Some atheists go further. In fact, some atheists argue, in fact, they are better than religious people. So Penn Jillette, one half of the popular comedy act Penn and Teller, wrote these words a few years ago. He said, "The question I get asked by religious people all the time is, without God, what's to stop me raping all I want? And my answer is, I do rape all I want, and the amount I want is zero. And I murder all I want, and the amount I want is zero. The fact that these people think that if they didn't have this person, i.e. kind of God, watching over them, that they would go on killing and raping rampages is the most self-damning thing I can possibly imagine." In other words, Penn Jillette is saying, he's saying atheists don't need God to be good. And in fact, more than that, Christians are obviously only good because we think that God is sitting up there watching us, going to zing us with a thunderbolt if we do something wrong. So therefore, atheists are better. Because as one atheist put it, atheists do good when nobody is watching. Wow. Does all this work as an argument? Can you be good without God? Are atheists better than Christians because they do good for goodness' sake and so on? Well, as an argument, it fails badly. And let me illustrate using an illustration and then do a critique for you. Imagine that I'm having lunch with an old friend, another old friend. I have lots of old friends. I have lunch with an old friend at a vegetarian pizza restaurant. And my old friend, his name is Garth, and interestingly, he has just started dating a girl who is a devout Buddhist. So he's doing the whole vegan thing. So when I said, where should we meet for lunch, he picked a vegetarian pizzeria. Well, halfway through lunch, I look up from poking my lentil pizza very suspiciously with a fork to see Garth reach into his pocket, bring out a small plastic container and shake the contents all over his pizza. "What's that?" I ask him, puzzled. "Tuna," he whispers. "Tuna?" I say. "Shh! says, shush, shush, shush. Not every vegan takes the liberal approach that I do. Anyway, what's all the fuss about? I eat fish. Big deal. Fish doesn't count as meat. It can't be. It lives in water. I look at him puzzled and say, sorry, are you claiming to be a vegan and you're eating fish? Yes. He says, I eat fish. Also prawns, crab, shellfish, lobster, that sort of thing. Strangest vegan I ever met, I say. Oh, duck as well. He says, duck. Duck? Well, said Garth, ducks live in water, so they're not meat either, right? Let me get this straight, I say, scratching my head for a moment. You're claiming to be a vegan. You're telling your girlfriend, your colleagues, your family that you're a vegan. You're subjecting old friends to vegan restaurants, all the while chowing down on anything that moves. Why don't you just come clean and admit you're an omnivore like the rest of us? You're a hypocrite. Hypocrite? Said Garth, looking genuinely offended. I thought you'd be more progressive. Besides, who says that you, Andy, get to define the word vegan? Who died and made you king of the dictionary? I say that vegan means somebody who occasionally eats meat when there is a vowel in the name of the month. How dare you tell me that your meaning of the word vegan trumps my meaning of the word vegan? Well now, how does that little episode help us think through the I can be good without God claim? Well, just as my lunchtime conversation there turned on the question of what the word vegan means, so we need to ask what the word good means. Who gets to define the word good? Does every human being get to define good for ourselves? In which case, the word is meaningless. I call helping the poor good, and you, on the other hand, you call torturing small animals to death good. And we have no way of assessing which one of us is correct or nearer to the truth. Furthermore, if I call myself good, if I call myself a good person even, but I get to define what good means, well, that's rather like my taking a bow and arrow, kind of shooting it at a wall 100 meters away, and then drawing a target around the arrow on the wall and announcing I must be an Olympic standard archer because I hit the bullseye. If you draw the target after you shot the arrow, we can all be Olympic archers, and if we all get to define the word good, then even the most vicious person in the world, even Adolf Hitler or Pol Pot or Mao Zedong, whoever you want to pick, they can all say, yeah, we're good people, because we get to define what the word good means. Similar problems to that definition of goodness happen when atheists start making fine-sounding statements about our society progressing morally. So Richard Dawkins, our old friend, the Oxford atheist, wrote these words. He said, some of us lag behind the advancing wave of the changing moral zeitgeist. In other words, society is improving and it's getting, the zeitgeist, the moral context, getting better all the time. He says, some of us lag behind the advancing wave of the changing moral zeitgeist, and some of us are slightly ahead. But most of us in the 21st century, we're bunched together and way ahead of our counterparts in the Middle Ages, or the time of Abraham, or even as recently as the 1920s. The whole wave keeps moving. And of course the advance is not a smooth incline, but a meandering sawtooth. But over the longer timescale, the progressive trend is unmistakable, and it will continue. But of course we need to ask Dawkins, what does the word progress mean in that sentence? He's talking about moral progress. Well, what does progress mean? After all, doesn't progress imply a destination? I love hiking and walking, and imagine that one day I'm out walking in the hills and my wife rings me up on my mobile phone and she says, Andy, how is your hike going? And if I reply, I'm progressing, she will naturally assume I'm nearer to my destination, not lost in the wilderness with one boot missing and my sandwiches stolen by a bunch of marauding squirrels. So, when we talk about society progressing, what is the destination? Where is it we're heading in Dawkins' mind? How do we know when we've arrived? You see, atheism has a real problem here, because whether you try and say society determines morality, or whether you try and explain it using evolution or science, or no matter what you want, the problem is you can't define what good means. And unless you can define what the word good means, without collapsing into personal preference, you are totally have huge problems going on here. No wonder that other atheists, perhaps the famous 19th century atheist Friedrich Nietzsche, end up concluding things like this. Nietzsche, one of the most influential atheists of all time, wrote these words. He said, "When you give up the Christian faith, you pull the right to Christian morality out from under your feet. This morality is by no means self-evident. Christianity is a system, a whole view of things thought out together. And when you break one main concept out of it, the faith in God, you break the whole. Nothing necessary remains in your hands." The problem is, we need a basis for goodness and justice that are outside of us. Just as 2 + 2 = 4 is a mathematical fact independent of us, so we need an independent basis for goodness that is external to us. And God, his nature as truly good, truly just, truly holy, those things are grounded in God's very character and nature, give us a tremendous foundation. And when as Christians we read in the Bible in Genesis chapter 1 verse 27 that God created us in his image, do you know that also gives a very, very good basis for human rights and dignity too, because human beings have real value and real significance. Yet talk of good and evil is fascinating because that's not a theoretical question. It's also a very personal question. It's hard to talk about good and especially about evil without quickly realizing, if you are an honest person, that we are responsible for the evil we do and for the good that we don't do. There's a very famous British novelist and a screenwriter called Nick Hornby. He has no religious faith as far as I know, but he's a man who often asks spiritual questions. And he recently said this. He said, "I'm a good person in most ways, but I'm beginning to think that being a good person in most ways doesn't count for anything very much if you're a bad person in one way." Well, dealing with that issue that Nick identifies there is of course something that Jesus had a lot to say about. And that brings us nicely to Jesus as we close. You know, as Christians, when we talk to our atheist friends, we can sometimes forget to bring the conversation into land on Jesus. And I often say to my atheist friends, we can sometimes forget how startling it is that we're talking about Jesus. Why is it startling that here we are in the 21st century that we're talking about Jesus? Well, the fact that it's startling and surprising is well made by the famous meditation written almost a century ago called One Solitary Life. It goes like this. He was born in an obscure village, the child of a peasant woman. He grew up in another village where he worked in a carpenter's shop until he was 30. Then for 3 years he was an itinerant preacher. He never wrote a book, never held an office, never went to college, never visited a big city. He never travelled more than 200 miles from the place where he was born. He did none of the things that usually accompany greatness. He had no credentials but himself. He was only 33 when the tide of public opinion turned against him. His friends ran away. One of them denied him. He was turned over to his enemies and he went through the mockery of a trial. He was nailed to a cross between two thieves, and whilst dying, his executioners gambled for his clothing, the only property he had on earth. When he was dead, he was laid in a borrowed grave through the pity of a friend. Yet all the armies that have ever marched, all the navies that have ever sailed, all the parliaments that have ever sat, all the kings that ever reigned put together, have not affected the life of mankind on earth as much as that one solitary life. You see, Jesus brings the whole God debate into sharp focus. Too often, arguments between Christians and atheists become, at least for me, sometimes glorified and extended exercises in totally missing the point. You see, the question that lies at the heart of Christianity is not, does God exist? The question that Christianity is primarily concerned with, that the Bible wrestles with, that the Gospels explore through the lens of the life of Jesus, is much more personal than that. The question that the Christianity is concerned with is, what kind of God are we talking about? But as well as the Gospels giving us tremendous window through the life of Jesus into that question of who God is, there's something else going on. See, I often like to say to my atheist friends, if the Gospels are true, they tell us something very deep indeed. Through that lens of the life and death, teaching and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth, they proclaim that everything is not acidic skepticism. Everything is not unyielding despair or hopeless lostness or the utter blackness of the void. But everything that is broken, including you and me, can be mended. The Gospels boldly declare, they boldly tell us that if they are true, if Jesus is who he claimed to be, then because of his history and in spite of ours, we can have a future. Perhaps it is time that our atheist friends laid aside at least the bad arguments, even just for a few hours, and gave Jesus a careful, considered look. Well, thanks for listening. It's been wonderful to be with you, even in pixelated virtual form. Really grateful that you took the time to listen. I hope what I shared was helpful. Do please check out the Solas Center for Public Christianity website, solas-cpc.org. In particular, I want to mention to you these wonderful resource we produced called the Short Answer videos. We've been doing these about 3.5 years. We have 70 videos now, each addressing a question about the Christian faith. They are perfect for sharing with friends. They are free to use. You can download them, share them, upload them, do anything you like with them. Just our hope is that they get into the hands of people who are not Christians, or they help equip you to share your faith with your friends. And that's a gift to you, to the church. Use it as a resource, and I really encourage you, take what you learn at this conference today, and don't just keep it to yourself. I hope that it builds you up and encourages you and equip you to share the love of Jesus and the truth of the gospel with friends, neighbours, colleagues, family members, and the rest. I hope and pray that you have a wonderful rest of the conference.
Kan vi ikke gi en god applaus til Andy Bannister? Så fint at du sitter og klapper deg hjemme også, veldig bra. Ja. Dette er bra, og gøy med humoren, og det på en måte utfordre litt, når man på en måte av og til kan bli litt sånn svarskyldig, vi vet ikke helt hva vi skal svare, når noen på en måte kanskje latterliggjør vår tro av og til. Men så gjør han det på en varm måte når han på en måte også bruker humor og utfordrer tilbake igjen. Så må vi ikke bare av og til, så tror jeg det er viktig at vi ikke tar noen av disse tingene han sa her og bare kjører på våre ateistiske venner. Vi skal ha en respektfull tone i forhold til det standpunkt som de har, men det opplever at han gjør på en varm og god måte, og så utfordrer han den troa de har som ateister. Og det er viktig å kunne gjøre at vi alle har en tro, vi har alle et livssyn som gjør at vi på en måte må avdekke, er det troverdig, dette livssynet? Og det synes jeg er fantastisk med den kristne tro, som jeg opplever at er troverdig, at er min tro verdig, og kanskje din tro verdig. Og da må du undersøke det. Så opplever vi det at hvis vi får lov til da å gå litt i dybden og undersøke hvem Jesus er, utfordre våre ateistiske venner til å legge til sides og bare våge å følge Jesus en liten periode for å se om man er troverdig. Det kan vi alle sammen gjøre. Enten vi er ateister eller kristne, så kan vi følge Jesus en liten periode for å se om man er den han ga seg ut for å være. Kjempespennende. Se gjerne igjen denne videoen. Det kan du gjøre på Veritas-konferansen. Du kan gjøre det på Snakk om tro. Du kan gjøre det på Damaris, eller høre på Damaris sin podcast. Du kan finne alle seminar og alle ting som har vært på tidligere Veritas-konferanser også på disse stedene her. Og så minner vi om det digitale bokbordet på veritaskonferansen.no. Denne boka da, som nylig er kommet på norsk, kanskje det kan være en julegave. Kanskje du kan gi den til en venn som ikke tror på Gud, men som tror at det ikke finnes en Gud. Og så er alt dette gratis. Så derfor er vi litt frimodige til å utfordre. Nå kommer det sånn rett etterpå, når jeg er ferdig nå, så kommer det noen slides som forteller hvordan du kan gi gjennom Vips, og hvor du kan lese om visjonen i forhold til Veritas-fondet. Men dette er så takknemlig for alle disse bøkene som kommer ut, og som hjelper oss til å på en måte bli bevisstgjort, og også kunne utfordre tanken som lever i samfunnet. Så benytt av det, gi en god gave, og tusen takk for den gaven du er med og gir. Nå trenger vi ikke bare fylle koppen, vi skal fylle hele kroppen. Vi skal få lov til å spise litt lunsj. Så du som er der hjemme, finner noe godt å spise, og så skal vi sitte her sammen og snakke videre, og snakke om disse temaene gjerne, og ha god lunsj. Og så er vi tilbake. Du trenger ikke gå ut av livestreamen, du kan bare holde deg på den, men bare gå ut og spise litt, og så er du tilbake igjen 13:30. Da er det tid for seminar nummer 3, og det er Birgitte Viste som skal ha temaet «Hva er den seksuelle revolusjonens skjulte kostnader?» Og da har vi Birgitte her, så det er veldig kjekt, så da gleder vi oss til å høre henne live herfra. Takk for nå. God lunsjpause.